It is my great pleasure to kick off our first Crimes Against Culture online lecture series. So I am Dr. Peter Campbell. I'm a lecturer in cultural heritage under threat at Cranfield University. And this is the first of our monthly online lecture series, which features contemporary issues in heritage crime. These lectures will be the third Thursday of every month, so we hope that you will join us for the other lectures as well. This is part of the Cranfield Forensic Institute's new master's degree in forensic investigation of heritage crime, which just started this past year. It is my great pleasure to introduce my three esteemed colleagues. Our primary speaker tonight is Special Agent David Keller from Homeland Security Investigations, who will be giving the talk tonight on the US Toolbox for the investigation of trafficking of antiquities. Our introduction is going to be given by Chrisana. Chris is the Chief of Intelligence for Unit 2 at the Customs Intelligence Center in the Thai Customs Department. Previously, she spent 10 years as a customs agent at the Suvarnabhumi Airport. And our discussant this evening at the end of the lectures will be Cameron Walter, who's from Transnational Threats, the Border Security and Management Unit at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, who is formerly an agent with the Canadian Border Services. So with that, I would like to start with our introduction by Chris, who will be speaking about Thai border security. Chris, handing it over to you.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Mr. Peter, to trying to speak my name correctly. Actually, my name is Glitsana Sisupachok. So I'm a former custom agent at Suvarnabhumi Airport, the biggest airport in Thailand. For my experiences, I have experience for the importation of the goods from the cargo, for the air cargo especially. But today I would like to give you information about how Thai customs deal with cultural crime. Okay, let's start with my presentation. First of all, I have to give you an information. The Thai Customs Department for our country, we are the revenue based. So the most big that we concern is still revenue for the revenue collection. But the second thing that we also concern is about anything that will harm our social, like the narcotic thing, and also something that's very important to the heart of the people. I could say that Thai people, we have the strong tie with the religion, and most of our cultural objects related to the religion. So the cultural crime will be one of our concern for the Thai customs. Here, as you see in our mission, the third one is enhance social protection capability with the custom control system. So the social protection is one of the most concerns within the Thai customs. And as I mentioned the Thai people, we have the strong tie with the religion. You can see here, 95% of Thai people they are Buddhism. So most of our cultural objects related to the Buddhism, like Buddha sculpture or the lintel that related to our temple, because the lintel is like the decoration at the temple. For our custom control, this is a picture of the inspector when we have to do the physical inspection. So it's not easy for us to do this in the daytime, but we have tools to help us. The tool is like we have the risk management technique to identify what we're gonna do the physical inspection or what we gonna do with the good. Like we will do the X-ray machine. Is it okay for just X-ray? So we have the several profile to deal with the cultural crime. Some of the good that imported by the postal, we do the 100% X-ray because most of the time the small cultural object they smuggling with the by the way that like postal. So sometimes they also smuggling in the big container. X-ray machine will help us a lot. About the risk management, as I told you, we have to control between the custom control and also the facilitate trade. So we could do the physical inspection only this area, the high risk area is only like 5 or 10%. That's why we need the other technique or other machine to help us. This is a picture of the X-ray machine that I mentioned that we can X-ray the big container because it's this big. Next, I will move on the law and the regulation in Thailand about the cultural object. The one that control the cultural object actually like take care all of the cultural object thing is the Department of Fine Arts, not customs. But depend on this regulation, they act on ancient monuments, antique objects of art, and National Museum since 1961. We have this act since 1961, so it shows that we concerned about our cultural objects so much since that time. Depend on this, no person shall export or import any antique or cultural object without license. You can see the yellow one here. The license has been obtained from the Director General first if you have to import or export this type of goods. And within our custom law, the Custom Act the latest one, our Custom Act says that people shall have like, if they have any manner to avoid or attempt to avoid the restriction or prohibition of such a good, they have the punishment. They have to be like imprisoned or maybe fined 500,000 baht above. So this is the power of Thai custom to deal with the cultural object. The work of art for custom is classified in the chapter 97, work of art collection of piece. So we have several things within these chapters, like painting or archaeological things, and also the antique that have exceeded 100 years. So the importation license needed for this type of good, and also the export of this type of good also need the license. This is my showcase. I will show you some of the seizure cases that we have seized. For this one is very special. If you see the picture, you may identify this one as a cultural object, maybe from China or anything. But in the real life situation, this one we cannot detain as the cultural object. But this made from the agar wood sculpture. So this is we detain this one because of the CITES rule, not for the cultural object. So sometimes for the real life situation, we have to be careful which of the rule that we will use for this type of good. So we have to be careful. But next is a good example for you guys. For this X-ray picture, as I mentioned that we use the X-ray machine to help us. For these X-ray pictures, you might see several stuff inside. Nothing weird. Okay, they declare as furniture, the furniture. So where is the weird stuff in these pictures? It's right here. You could see this is a Buddha sculpture without any decoration, and they attempt to smuggling to USA, to America, without any license. They declare as a wooddecker ceramic, but they hit the Buddha sculpture inside. This is a picture of that Buddha sculpture that we saw in the X-ray machine. And next case, this may look like just like a simply decoration stuff. You might not consider it as a cultural object, but this wall art, you could usually see this wall art at the front of the temple. It's not just the wall art because it's like a temple door. So they have like an ancient, in the ancient time, when people would like to make some holy thing or would like to pray, they will make this thing, like, how can I say? They will make this really important to the culture. This is an example for the old one of the door. They will have several pictures and some that related to the history. There's a second X-ray picture. Can you find something strange in this picture? Some people might notice here. For this, they attempt to smuggle to Belgium and also hidden the Buddha sculptures without declaration for the custom declaration and without any license. And this the pictures, the real pictures. If I remember correctly, this is not Thai because it's this is an undeclared, the Burma statue. So if I remember correctly, we already returned this one to Burma. So for this case, also Buddha sculptures, as I mentioned, that we have a strong tie with the religion, everything that related to the religion, we will have the big impact if we will not see it or detain it or make a good control about it. This one attempt to smuggling to United Kingdom, UK, without any license also. So this is all for me. Thank you all for listening. I'm sorry that my English is not that good, so maybe some difficult for me also to explain. But thank you all for listening. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Thank you, Chris. That was fantastic. Really excellent work and excellent presentation. And we are very appreciative that given how late it is in Thailand that you joined us. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And an excellent segue into the presentation by Special Agent David Keller.
Okay. Good morning. As Pete said, my name is Dave Keller. I'm a Special Agent with Homeland Security Investigations in San Francisco, California. And the first thing I want to do is take a minute to just kind of explain who we are, because well, there hasn't been a really good movie made about Homeland Security investigations yet, so a lot of people still aren't quite sure who we are. We are the largest investigative arm of the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security was created after September 11th, and it was combined several agencies like the U.S. Customs Service, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and other agencies all together for one large enforcement and border security agency. So we are involved with a broad scope of investigative areas. As you can see on the list here: financial crimes, child exploitation, cyber crimes, national security crimes, human smuggling, transnational games, counterproliferation, narcotics enforcement, basically almost everything that you could go after, we have a hand in. At the bottom, but not the least forgotten, is Cultural Property, Art, and Antiquities program, which is what I'm mainly, a lot of my casework is in. And that's what I want to talk to you all about today, because the Department of Homeland Security Investigations is the lead agency on enforcement of the trafficking of cultural property through the United States, into and out of, and we're going to talk a little bit about why we are as great as we are. So we are heavily rooted in customs law. Trafficking in antiquities and trafficking in general, if you just the word itself indicates that the major fight in this is a customs fight. I've done a lot of workshops with Pete, and as you can see from the previous presentation, that customs agencies are heavily involved in the prevention of trafficking of anything. Anything that comes in and out of a country, customs is there first. Every customs agency has very much the same authorities and laws, just in their own countries, though. It's, you know, the same power to stop things. So our cultural property program hits a lot of different types of cultural property. We have had cases of recovering and repatriating art that was looted by the Nazis during World War II. These two examples, one is from our Los Angeles office, and others from our Tampa office. We have a very significant history of recovering stolen paleontological property, dinosaur bones and fossils, especially from Mongolia and China. A lot are trafficked from there. Mongolia, in fact, if you're ever in Ulaanbaatar, actually has a Homeland Security wing in their National Dinosaur Museum, which houses all of everything that we've returned to them that has shown up in auctions or just being sold illicitly. It's pretty exciting to see an entire wing of a museum dedicated to your agency. And we have a pretty good fan club in Mongolia for this work. We have some significant cases that have recently, actually on the right, one of our agents from Wilmington, Delaware. He's recovered numerous stolen Columbus letters that it was a publication that was put out based by like Columbus, his team, his report basically back on his discoveries were printed and published. Some of the original documents were stolen from the Vatican Library. This particular case was actually on the new show 60 Minutes. He's recovered, I think about 5 so far. And these are found in auction houses, bookstores, all kinds of things. There's historic documents we've recovered as an agency, a lot of stolen Russian historic documents that were part of a big theft ring after the Iron Curtain came down in the early 90s. On this case here on the left is the Cambodian statue that myself and one of our top agents from our New York office we recovered. This went through an auction house. It was from a private collection and is in the process of going back to Cambodia. We work with federal prosecutors, but we also have a relationship with a lot of state prosecutors, state and city. For instance, this fella here is Matthew Bogdanos. He's an assistant district attorney in New York. And our New York office has done a lot of cases through his office. Sometimes federal prosecution doesn't quite pan out, and we can seize and repatriate using state law, which is one of the interesting abilities that we have as federal agents. Cultural property can take many forms. This on the bottom right are human skulls. There's a tribal tradition from Indonesia. There's a strange market for these sort of things, and depending on how they were entered into the country, they aren't supposed to be distributed. So when we talk about the tools that we have as federal agents, basically, since we're federal agents, our tools are the law. So we have a set of laws that we apply toward our casework. And once we have a case, we determine with the help of federal prosecutors, assistant U.S. attorneys, how are we going to, what hammer are we going to hit it with? So these are basically most of the laws that we deal with in the process of preventing the trafficking of cultural heritage. And these are all are customs-based laws. We also have National Stolen Property Act, which deals with transportation or sale or receipt of stolen goods, unlawful importation. We have an authority that we work with. We work with our Customs and Border Protection officers. Those are the uniformed officers that you see at the airports or at the seaports that inspect and examine people in cargo that enter the United States. So they have an authority that we share with them as a customs agency. It's called Border Search Authority. So that basically means anything that comes into or is leaving the United States, we don't need a warrant to look at it. All bets are off until we say it can come in or it can leave. We also have our own subpoena authority. So depending on what information we need for an investigation, we have an authority to actually issue a subpoena to somebody to produce documents or information that we don't have to go get a judge to sign. It's quick, it's an efficient process, and it's a great help to us in our investigations. We also have seizure and forfeiture authority. So we can seize and forfeit something, or we can seize it and the Department of Justice can forfeit it. A forfeiture, for those of you that may not be familiar, is basically we take a piece of property that belongs to or believed to belong to somebody else, and we turn it into the property of the U.S. government. Once that's done with cultural property, we can return it to the country of origin, to where it came, or to the rightful owner. We have repatriated to museums. We've repatriated art that was stolen from the Nazis to actual individual families who were the victims. We repatriate to governments, and we've also repatriated to, for instance, we had returned an artifact to the U.S. Naval Academy and other museums around the world and within the United States. So some of the other tools we have, the UNESCO, the Convention on the Means of Prohibiting and Preventing Illicit Import, Export, and Transfer of Ownership of Cultural Property, which is a UN treaty that was signed and that was created in 1970. So this is a guideline for expected behavior of all the consignators on this when it comes to trafficked cultural heritage. It's used as a guideline. A lot of times, if you look at something on the news about stolen cultural property, you'll hear a reference to 1970. And if it was stolen before 1970, it doesn't count. Like it's not subject to that law. Well, that's kind of true, but that is not the case, as I'm going to illustrate a little later, with depending on the countries it came from and what happens, how it entered the United States. Bilateral agreements, these are basically, in broad terms, it's a treaty for between the United States and individual countries on specific subjects. We have right now 22 bilateral agreements on trafficking of cultural heritage. And actually 2 of them were just recently signed. Turkey and Morocco were the last 2 to take part in this type of agreement with the United States. The bilateral agreements are created by the State Department. I would go to state.gov and look these up and just see the verbiage in them. It's very interesting to look into. There's also, we have, in addition to the 22 bilateral agreements, we have 3 emergency actions for Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. I didn't mean to go forward, but we also have as our agency, Homeland Security Investigations and Immigration Customs Enforcement, which is our overall, our major branch that we belong to. We actually signed, we have an agreement with an entire government, the government of the Republic of South Korea. We're one of the only agencies that has done this, and because of our international abilities, we are able to broker this sort of an agreement. This was signed in July of 2014 with our director and the Republic of South Korea. So this basically is a tool, because what it does is it gives us more leverage in our investigations when we encounter either somebody that has property of cultural property of this government or governments that we have bilateral agreements with. This is our area of working. We are the agency that does this because of our customs authority and because of our ability to work overseas and to engage with foreign law enforcement. A couple other helpers with us is the International Council of Museums. They basically, when we have cases that deal with museums and private collections that have ended up in museums, the International Council of Museums and the American Alliance of Museums are basically have created codes of ethics that under which museums should be operating on different levels. A lot of deals with how museums should respond to claims of stolen property. And while it's not an enforcement tool, it is definitely, they're very important in exerting the kind of sense into some museums when we're trying to deal with them and recover stolen property. So my talk today, we wanted to focus on Thailand specifically. Thailand is, unique. almost every country we deal with is unique because we need to, a lot of times, deal with the laws of that country in order to incorporate the laws of our country in the seizure and forfeiture and repatriation processes. So what is Thailand? So as Thailand as we know it and as we deal with it now was founded by King Rama I, who reigned from 1782 to 1809. And he basically founded what was known as the Siam Kingdom. And he was the first monarch of the current the reigning and the current reigning Chakri dynasty. Later on, during the reign of Rama IX, the kingdom was renamed to the Kingdom of Thailand, which is how we know it now. And just a little trivia: Thailand actually translates to "land of the free," which I kind of find interesting, as that's a moniker we tend to use here in the United States. So every country is made up of its laws. It's an important part of the establishing their civilization. And when Rama I took over, he appointed a commission to conduct a revision of all the previous laws and also religious texts from the Ayutthaya period. And it was a compilation was done, and they took all those laws and produced 27 laws based on the previous laws, and corrections were made and all that. And that became known as the Three Seals Law or the Three Seals Code. So the Three Seals Law was basically the law of Thailand from 1805 through into the 20th century, and is still in their current law. A lot of it is still substantially there. And the Three Seals remained in effect until the early 20th century. One of the interesting things I found in the Three Seals laws, in the text of the law of theft. So they have a law of dealing with theft. There are two clauses which basically identifies cultural property, and they identify cultural property separate from other types of property, and they identify it in a way that if you steal it, if you harm it, or anything, you are going to be punished, and they set penalties in the law. So stealing a Buddha, not a good thing to do. You can get lashes, you can get fined, all that. Also, monks' quarters or temples, basically religious places, were identified as something special. And if you violate them in any way, you're going to be in trouble. So this is early on, the people of Thailand were identifying the importance of their cultural heritage and incorporated it into their law. So that's significant. You don't see that everywhere. It's interesting to see that at that time this was important. Later on, King Rama IV, he actually established a law to create provisions for the conservation and protection of ancient monuments. So this is now this is in the middle of the 1800s. The king is saying, we have a history here. We have monuments. We have cultural places that need to be cared for, preserved, and protected. There was at that time there were temples and prasats and structures that were over 1,000 years old already. So to see that in the mid 1800s, really some real forethought in their process. King Rama VI created the Fine Arts Department, which is still around today. The Fine Arts Department is now under the Ministry of Culture, and they have a lot of tasks with the protection, recovery of stolen artifacts, and managing of museums throughout Thailand. This quote here was from King Rama VI, and he cites the importance of the government to be responsible to protect and conserve the cultural heritage of that country. 1926, the Act on Exporting Cultural Property, which is a customs law, was in place. So that basically defined what is cultural property, what is allowed to be sent and exported, and can it be exported legally? And there are ways of exporting cultural heritage from Thailand legally. So this established those procedures. The Act on Monuments in 1934, the Act on Monuments, Objects of Art, Antiquities, Antiques and National Museums. This basically further identified rules on taking anything out of the country, any cultural property, cultural heritage out of the country. It also identifies who's in charge of different aspects like museums and archaeological surveys. And in 1935, Thailand created a list of national archaeological sites. So they identified several hundred locations, monuments, buildings, temples that are their cultural heritage and are the property of the government of Thailand. That comes into play with a lot of our cases, as when we deal with stolen property, identifying the owner is sometimes problematic. So when it comes to Thailand, we have actually a pretty easy time with a lot of these items that end up in various markets. And that was in 1935. So in 1943, 61, 72, and 92, there were additions and amendments made to the Act on Ancient Monuments, which basically just expanded the authority or the protected areas, surrounding, area actually underneath certain monuments and all that. So it's an ongoing process, and Thailand is unusually solid with their protection of their cultural heritage. It makes our job easier, and they're very specific with what they've created. In that process, as I mentioned, when somebody asks and challenges, well, you know, if I illegally exported it, we need to demonstrate that an illegal export is actually illegal because there is no procedure in place or to bring it out legally. You have to kind of prove and disprove. So in their process with their export laws and just their cultural heritage preservation laws in general, to export something legally, you have to have a permit. This permit, as you can see, it's a form. It's got information on it. The back has an actual photograph of what's being exported. There are stamps on the document and the photographs, just like a passport or something would have. It's a very significant document. This one is from 1961. These were some objects that were exported legally. This one is from 1967. And this one is from 1989. I show you this because the evolution over 3 decades, this process basically has not changed. As you can see, the document, pretty much all the same information, and the back of the document has photographs with stamps. So one of the things that we see is that when something is identified as cultural heritage from Thailand, if you don't have this, you basically don't have permission from the Thai government to have taken it out of the Kingdom of Thailand. That tends to prove significantly in our investigations. Not having permission to take something out of the kingdom is almost by definition theft. So keep that in the back of your head. One of the great heroes of Thailand is Professor Subhadradis Diskal. He was actually the grandson of King Rama the sixth, I believe. I want to just make sure I got that right. Professor Diskal was an archaeologist and a historian who basically put Thailand on the map with archaeological studies of not only Thailand, but Southeast Asia. He established the archaeological and art history from the viewpoint of the Thai people, the in-depth study of Thai history, the reevaluation of the chronological division in Thai history, and studies of the Khmer style of ruins located in Northeast Thailand. Those ruins are victimized by a lot of theft. And because of the style of art, they're really magnificent. And Professor Diskal also went head on with museums and collectors all over the world to recover stolen property. He was responsible for a lot of archaeological surveys of these areas that we're still recovering artifacts from. If any archaeologists that may be on, if you have any interest in Southeast Asian art, I would suggest to check out some of his books. I have a couple in my collection. He was a really interesting and like I said, he's definitely a hero of Thai culture. A great person to read about. So Professor Diskal was a spearhead in a lot of Thai cultural heritage recovery. When we look at different areas of theft and where we find stolen cultural heritage, we see private collections, we see museums. There's on today's platforms on the internet, we have all kinds of sale sites and whatnot. So in the after World War II, the United States saw some major collections that had a lot of Southeast Asian art. And Avery Brundage was one of these people. Avery was an American industrialist. He was also an Olympic athlete, head of the U.S. Olympic Committee, and eventually in 1952 was the president of the International Olympic Committee. He was U.S. Olympic Committee and International until 1972. He's a controversial figure. Said a lot of things that don't really appeal to a lot of people. But he was very wealthy and actually went on a frenzy of buying up Asian art and created the largest private Asian art collection in the world at the time. Like most collectors, they try to, eventually they need to put their collection somewhere. So he arranged basically with a museum in San Francisco to exhibit, and then eventually willed over 8,000 artifacts and pieces of art from all over Asia to the city of San Francisco for the creation of a museum. So in the early, in the 60s, before the Asian Art Museum was built, he had his wing of another museum, the Young Museum in San Francisco. Had a lot of his stuff there. And a catalog came out of an exhibit, and in 1967, Mr. Brundage received a letter from Thailand that Professor Diskel, in his research, had generated. So the letter basically says, hey, nice catalog, you have some interesting pieces here, but a couple of them are actually stolen. I'd like to talk about that. Avery Brundage responded, it's like, if we were to do a written statement analysis of this, everything he says in here is a deflection. Basically, I don't know, I bought it in the United States. The guy that I bought it from, I don't think he realizes that, blah, blah, blah. But what he then says is, well, instead of taking it back, well, if we exhibit it here, maybe that'll help tourism in Thailand. So big deflection. Like I said, this is 1967. I also want to point out that these are letters that are on file with the Thai Ministry of Culture. They are meticulous in their record keeping because they still have letters from 1967. They have all the procedures that were done. And basically, it took about 3 years, but Avery Brundage eventually gave up this lintel. This is the Khu Swan Tang lintel. Cambodia and Thailand were big on their lintels. It was a style of art that hadn't been seen a lot. Major collections in the States. Avery Brundage probably on the West Coast, and then probably the Rockefellers on the East Coast. Rockefellers were famous. Michael Rockefeller, his son, Nelson Rockefeller, was in Indonesia buying up all kinds of Indonesian art that had not been seen as kind of new on the art scene when he went missing. Interesting story to listen to check out if you're not familiar. So this was actually, if you think about it, this was a piece of a temple. This is usually sits above a doorway. They're architectural and artistic in nature. It's sandstone, usually carved. As you can see, the carving on there is amazing. And when somebody says that I'm the rightful owner of this, I think any reasonable thought process applied to that would reveal that that doesn't make any sense, because this is off of a 1,000-year-old temple in Thailand. So the Thai government initiated, again, Professor Diskel initiated a conversation with the Art Institute of Chicago in 1972 about yet another lintel. And that lintel was ultimately returned to Thailand. It was on exhibit in the as I mentioned, the Art Institute of Chicago. But this lintel did not get returned until 1988. So, 16 years later, the lintel was returned, and for a time, I think it's been removed since then for structural reasons. But they put it back on the prasat, or the temple, where it belongs. This is very important to Thai culture, to the Thai people, and the Thai public in general is very, very aware of these things. These are, little small villages in, not very far, not near city centers, and people have lived with these artifacts, these temples, and these lintels that have significant spiritual value for their entire lives. Some of the pieces I've dealt with, we actually have witnesses of the thefts of some of these things from back in the 1960s. The other thing we find is that through cases that I've dealt with, and my colleagues in New York and other offices, is that the dealers involved back then, there was actually a small circle of dealers, mostly Europeans. Some of the businesses that they represented are still actually in business and been around for hundreds of years, but they were responsible for the looting, which was significant. Southeast Asia and in general, but Thailand especially, was hit very hard during that era. Most of those people are gone now that were responsible for the thefts. They've passed away. New York actually indicted one of the more prolific dealers back 2 years ago. He was in his 80s and he passed away before any trial could happen. But here in the United States, we had Operation Antiquity in 2008. This was 5 museums in Southern California. I'm sorry, 4 museums and some dealers in Southern California, where a significant collection of Ban Chang pottery was stolen. There was a trafficking group that was taking things from Thailand, and managers of these museums were purchasing them. This particular operation, which was a 5-year investigation that resulted in warrants and seizures of over like 1,500 pieces of artifacts from Thailand. Basically, this is one of our more significant actual raids. We actually also my agency worked with the Internal Revenue Service on this because of the money laundering aspect and the failure of reporting profits from the theft and sales of these things. And that's also another fun thing. I like bringing the IRS into investigations because they are quite lethal in their procedures, and I wouldn't want to have them go after me. These are some of the pieces that were returned after the investigation and all the seizures in 2014. Our agency returned a little over 500 of these artifacts to the government of Thailand. Ban Chang is a prehistoric site that was actually it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So there were numerous protections on it. One of the experts that testified in court actually cited that the amount of objects that were stolen and recovered in this operation was 175 times more than the objects that were recovered during actual excavations. And part of the problem with these types of thefts that come from archaeological sites is all of the archaeological context of these artifacts is lost. So when we see things coming from the Middle East, like a cuneiform tablet with writing on it, well, that writing means something to that particular area. So when they're stolen, removed, and sold for pretty much just greed, a lot of the understanding of the evolution of human history, especially in that region, is lost. So it's a terrible thing, and it's a timeless thing. It's been around forever. Another thing Thailand likes to do is they use their media, their newspapers, and they put out all kinds of great information. There is a committee, Committee for Repatriation of National Heritages from Foreign Countries to be returned to Thailand. This is a group of archaeologists that are working with and for the Fine Arts Department within the Ministry of Culture. One of the things they do is they go online, they find museums that have certain things, they check their records and they verify, hey, this probably belongs to us. So then they make sure that they talk to these museums, talk to where they've identified these artifacts, and as they're making claims, first they usually start this previous lintel. The Consul General from Thailand came to talk to the museum in San Francisco, said, hey, we'd like to talk about this. The discussion did not go very far, which is where things like the Code of Ethics for the International Convention of Museums comes into play. And then we got a call. So then we start looking at our procedures. They also found other artifacts in their inventory that were suspect and probably from Thailand. This is on the web page. You can see basically the description, pretty good picture. So when they do this, I got put on this case. First thing I do is get all the documents from the museum on the provenance of these artifacts. Provenance is that record of who owned these, where did they come from, and provenance is very important for a legitimate collection. If you have suspect provenance, if you have no provenance, and something that belongs to somebody that is clearly presented evidence, you don't want that sort of thing in a private collection. It taints everything. So then I say to Thailand, okay, can you explain to me why you believe this is yours? So amazingly, this was one of the great experiences I've had, is they started, basically they gave me details that were really, really quite impressive. So both of these, we're looking at two lintels at this museum. Both of these are archaeological surveys from like 1959, and very clear pictures at that time that was shows these lintels. So the comparative analysis is pretty easy. If you look at this picture and the picture from the website, you know what? It's really hard to say that that's not that piece. You know, here's the side by side. This is the website. This is the 1959 survey. Same thing over here. Really kind of hard to say, man, I don't think that's it. So then they went a little further and actually pointed out better details. So there's a hole here, and then there's a hole here. This is 1959. This is present. It's very, all their measurements, very interesting, and really, really hard to argue. So then on top of all that, there's more actual diagrams of the temple, of the prasat. It's a prasat, which is a sanctuary, not a temple, but a small structure, about 1,000 years old, where the lintel came from. Overwhelming evidence, and for an investigation, overwhelming evidence is the best kind of evidence to have. At the end of the whole thing, not only do they have all this evidence, but if you remember, I mentioned that list of registered monuments. Both of those prasats are on that list. So in 1935, those temples were deemed the property of the Kingdom of Thailand. So these were stolen sometime in the 60s. They fall well within the era of the theft, of being covered by all their laws. So also there were no export certificates, which probably would never be issued, because you actually had, whoever stole them had to do some damage to that prasat to get those off. And there's other ones around as well in other museums. So it's an ongoing thing. But this is a very airtight sort of situation. It's hard to argue, although it gets argued. There's hurt feelings, concerns that museum people are going to be liable, but that's probably not the issue, because they just had the collection that was donated, and nobody's going to be prosecuted for that. We're not going to prosecute Avery Brundage or the dealers who sold it to him posthumously, but they need to go back to Thailand. So when this has been a 3-year investigation, when it got a little contentious, the U.S. attorney then says, okay, so we're going to file the complaint, and it gets brought out into public, and eventually we've determined that they're going to be returned. So, it's a difficult process. Like I said, it was about a little over 3-year investigation for me. It was about a year from when the Thai government first talked to the museum, and it's a difficult situation to get through, but eventually this one worked out, and hopefully it will actually kind of help with other investigations as well. One of the interesting things is after it was announced that that they were coming back, because the public was well aware of this particular situation, is that from where the Nong Hong, the Prasat Nong Hong is the village. The people in the village actually want to put the lintel back on the Prasat from where it came. So they're already making plans. It's a very positive thing that they're looking forward to seeing, and I'm looking forward to that process ending as well. So so that's basically what I had to present. Hopefully in the future we can do this again and tell more of the story of Thailand, because they're continuously being affected by this. It hasn't stopped. Everyone knows about the trafficking that goes on out of the Middle East, what's happened to archaeological sites in Syria, in Afghanistan, and all those areas. But they're not the only places, and it's something that everybody's kind of getting better at. We work with, my agency works with a lot of foreign law enforcement. We have 80 offices in 53 different countries. The other thing we have in our toolbox is Customs Mutual Agreement Authority. So we can work with foreign customs agencies to investigate, to deal with any of this trafficking in all kinds of crimes, with fewer bureaucratic hurdles to cross in order to affect these investigations. And we have a great working relationship with many of the countries that we're in. Italy, we've done a lot of repatriations for Italy. Italy was our first bilateral agreement for cultural heritage. Hopefully, I could get Thailand to go into a bilateral agreement with us as well. That would be great to show the partnership. We do have an office in Bangkok, and I work directly with members of the Fine Arts Department, and they are, as you can see from just when I need something for these investigations, they provide it very quickly and very diligently. So that's about all that I have. And hopefully what I'd like people to do is maybe take some of this and research it on your own. I had a couple of websites up there. Check out the Homeland Security Investigations website. We have list a lot of the cultural property that we've dealt with. We've repatriated over 12,000 artifacts since 2007, and currently in the process of what we have not repatriated yet, but we have seized and have in detention and is in the process of being investigated or prosecuted, probably more than 10,000 other objects. I could probably have taken this whole time to just tell you about the amazing team of agents that I work with. And it's because nobody really knows too much about it. Then there's different issues tend to maybe overshadow this particular subject area, but I think that's it. So I'm gonna shut this and
thank you so much, Dave. That was terrific.
No problem.
Wonderful lecture. Overwhelming evidence is the best evidence. I couldn't agree more. You should have that kind of framed above your desk.
To put it on a t-shirt. Yeah.
That's right. Those are incredible cases. Thank you. I mean, it's really a credit to your agency and you as investigator, but also to the Thai Ministry of Culture and Government and having the foresight to enact these laws and archaeological surveys to document these sites so long ago, long before the 1970 UNESCO Convention. Right. Incredible. Well, yeah, now I would like to invite questions. If people have questions, put them into the chat function. And I will invite Cameron Walter to serve as discussant. So Cam is with the OSCE, Transnational Threats Border Security and Management Unit. The OSCE Transnational Threats has been really a revelation for border security and cultural property in the last, I'd say, decade or so, in training, raising the profile of cultural property, and enacting workshops around the world for the different regions, the different OSCE regions. So they've really been at the forefront of training frontline border security and customs agents, as well as police. So with that, I'd like to welcome Cameron, who obviously has the expertise of the OSCE, but then also his time with the Canada Border Services. So Cam, if you would please.
Great. Thank you, Peter, for the introduction and for the invitation to speak today. Dave, nice to see you. Thank you for the presentation. We've had the pleasure to work together now for, I think, 3 years in 6 countries. And every single time I hear your presentations, I learn something new. So keep it coming and keep up the good work. I think one thing I would really like to address or to dive into or know more from you that I think everyone could benefit from is, and this is a multi-part question, what trends are you seeing in both the US and globally in cultural property trafficking? Are the modes of trafficking changing between air, marine, mail? What routes are you seeing emerge, and have enforcement actions forced a change in those routes? And how large a problem is social media in this fight?
Well, I haven't checked stats on seizures here in the United States. Of course, our main concern is imports and exports from the United States. The United States is actually responsible for, I think, somewhere about 40% of the world's legitimate art market. We have other, China is on the rise, exceeding that. We also have some Middle Eastern countries that are significant as well. But so as far as trends, from what I've seen in our reports, basically all of the usual trends are pretty much, I haven't seen spikes. Like we deal with FedEx, UPS, mail, and we have the same problems as any other customs agency. Our Customs and Border Protection officers, there's only so many of them. Only so much stuff can get x-rayed. So that would be an interesting thing to do a little more research on to give a more accurate answer. The second part of that, social media. Social media is a severe problem. There are, I would say, if anyone is interested in seeing what's going on, the ATHR project, if you just Google ATHR project, there's a significant amount of research being done that has been done on different platforms on the internet where trafficking is an open market. The Middle East, Syria, Libya, Egypt, a lot of the areas of conflict, Lebanon, all those areas that are just loaded with all kinds of cultural heritage and history are being decimated. I'd love to get somebody on for another one of these lectures to show the level of what's going on. But a lot of that is marketed online on I don't want to say anyone in particular, but different social media platforms. And transacted money transactions, wire transactions to pay for them. They go into standard shipping, which goes to smuggling. So it's a huge problem. And some attention is being brought to it. Some differences are being made, hopefully soon. And but it's a monster, and it's actually pretty sad to see.
No, that's fair. And I knew even from my own experience in Canada, there's various outlets using social media to try to move pieces, whether it's skeletons, whether it's prehistoric pieces, whether it's cultural objects. I know you and I have discussed this beforehand. So I guess in that regard, how much does international law enforcement cooperation play into your work? Are you able to pull from the expertise of foreign law enforcement organizations? Are there databases you're able to utilize? Or how much are you pulling just strictly from U.S. sources?
So that's the great thing. That's the great thing about our agency. Homeland Security Investigations is tied in very closely to a lot of foreign law enforcement and foreign governments. Basically, on a lot of different cultural heritage issues from many countries, I can pick up a phone and I can call police officers, foreign customs, and tell them, hey, I have this going on, and get the ball rolling on an investigation. We work closely with Interpol, which Interpol, of course, shares a lot of information and can actually help to expedite putting us in touch with specific law enforcement agencies in a direct area. I have had several cases with the London Metropolitan Art Unit, which sadly is right now 2 officers. So they are overwhelmed with all kinds of other issues. But between utilizing our attachés in foreign countries, the relationships that the agents in HSI who do these cases have developed, and the networks of experts, because we rely heavily on assistance from academia, archaeologists, museum experts, any kind of people that we can, if we have an object and we're not sure what it is, if we can send some really good pictures, can you at least give us probable cause to detain? And that group is building. We're getting more of those people who respond to us in all these. And you got to remember, we're dealing with everything from ancient Egyptian, Syrian, African tribal art, Southeast Asian, Chinese. There's as many types of artifacts that you can think of. We have to find an expert that can identify what that is. But our agency, we are the best equipped agency, and that's why the success that we have is so much. Why we have so much success, because of those abilities. And working with agencies like the OSCE, from the workshops that I've worked on with you and the OSCE, we've networked a lot of people into this global effort.
On that topic of networking and what you just touched on, and given the fact that this lecture this webinar is hosted by Cranfield University, how much of a role has academia played in being able to finalize your cases? There's always a question of whether universities want to get involved, whether the experts at academia are able to verify. But how much have you been able to pull universities and other experts, either at museums or elsewhere, into your cases, and what challenges are you seeing in doing so?
Some successes with that are get a little drawn out. Here in the United States, I've encountered on several occasions where, like, a professor is maybe doesn't want to commit to identifying something. And there's a couple of reasons for that. There's liability issues. If it's something from an auction and a professor says, okay, it's authentic, then it maybe turns out to not be authentic. That can affect the price, the auction price later on of that. Where the United States tends to be a little sue happy, so they're concerned about that. Then there's also reputation. If it turns out that their assessment was not right, that's going to be a black mark on it. Other people don't care. I do have some academics in certain areas that are all over it when I give them a call. It's regional as well. Sometimes just some universities. I do hit problems with with Homeland Security. Not a popular agency to be with. So some people don't even understand why I'm involved with this. They're like, what are you, they don't quite understand what we do or who we are. So there's some challenges. It's getting better. And we do, like I said, we do have a good network of experts and worldwide that do assist. And usually the ones that I deal with, when they can't help me, they'll give me some phone numbers and email addresses to somebody who can. So there's, and then once those people help us, I bother them all the time to make sure that I know where they are. If I'm in town, I'll buy them lunch, whatever I can do to keep them on our friends list, because that is our greatest asset. And basically, a lot of cases we are not archaeologists, we're not scientists. We rely on them to provide the evidence that we need. So they are a huge part of our overall process in many cases.
So normally I would have a ton of other questions for you, but I see Peter's turned his camera on, which tells me that there are some questions from the floor. So at that point, I'll happily turn it over to the participants. And thank you again, Dave, for a super interesting presentation.
Anytime. Glad to be part of it. I'm looking forward to the next ones.
Absolutely, man. Peter, over to you.
Thank you both. It's always great to have a discussion between colleagues and experts to get things going. So we have a lot of questions from the audience, but I am also cognizant of the time. So I'm just going to pick a few here, especially the ones that overlap a lot with others. So Dave, we have one here that's asking about the relationship between border security and customs in the US and Homeland Security. And when border security agents encounter cases of cultural property during their searches and points of entry, are those referred to Homeland, or what's the process there? And who besides border security does Homeland Security collaborate with on these investigations?
Well, that's a fantastic question, because part of our whole process is exactly what that question was about. So we have at their ports of entry, which are seaports, airports, border crossings on land, between Mexico and Canada. We have our Customs and Border Protection officers who are responsible for the examination of all those people and as much cargo and all that. When they come across anything, Homeland Security investigations, we have the right of first refusal for any investigation at any port of entry in the United States. So when it comes into the United States, we are the investigative branch that it goes to. Now we can assess something that might be a different agency's purview after we get a hold of it. I've had cases that I've actually turned over to the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, because it was a smuggling case, but then it turned out to be something that, so we still get the smuggling aspect. So they are basically Customs and Border Protection. You have Border Patrol, which is actually now part of Customs and Border Protection. Basically they're the uniformed officers. We're the investigators when they find something. Now there's also they do a lot of targeting of cargo and people. They have databases of what they're looking for. When they see something coming, they let us know. We also enter stuff into databases from our investigations that kind of creates a circle of information that has a constant look. It's a layered approach to what's coming into the United States. And it's within all our programmatic areas. There's fewer people that are aware. We try to train CBP officers on cultural property each year, except for last year. We run a week-long training at the Smithsonian Institution, which is actually funded by the State Department and the Smithsonian, and to basically take our agents and explain how to do these cases. Any agent, any HSI agent can do these cases, but this is a specialization. So we also have Customs and Border Protection officers. We'll have assistant U.S. attorneys, because our prosecutors need to be aware of this as well. So when it comes to court time, it's an ongoing training and intelligence sharing, and we wouldn't have the results. A lot of our cases are initiated, probably over 90% of them are initiated by seizures at the border, and it's a good relationship. You know, the efficiency at certain areas, you know, if we could have it uniform, it would be fantastic, where everybody responds immediately. Sometimes you get an office of agents that doesn't know quite what to do, and there's delays. But that's the process. And like I said, they're an integral part of the cultural heritage trafficking prevention.
Thank you. So there's a bunch of questions around the same concept. So I'm going to kind of homogenize them all here. So if a collector or a museum unknowingly purchases a stolen work of art, do they automatically lose it, or is there a negotiation process? And by the same token, combining other questions, is there a process for museums that have stolen art to return it in some way, other than kind of seizures and court cases?
Yes, a lot of as I illustrated with Professor Diskel's efforts. Sometimes it's a little longer process, but a lot of times cases are addressed directly, and any government or owner has the absolute right to contact the museum and initiate some sort of dialogue. There are also situations where investigations may be kicked off by, as I mentioned, known dealers that have distributed stuff that was stolen that we've known about for a long time. So there's each case is different. By the time, if we've gotten involved, we're going to, you know, there's going to be that judicial process. And except for situations like the Bowers Museum in Southern California and the LA County Museum of Art, from Operation Antiquity, where there was active nefarious activity going on, that's of course a lot worse, and really not much that negotiating can be done. But then also a lot of our cases, we're not prosecuting anyone at those museums, because donations to museums, while, you know, an object files, the documents in the object file should raise flags for museum professionals. There should be some indication that, you know, but that's all part of the ethics issue, how that gets handled. But yeah, we get involved when somebody calls us and says, this is a problem and can you help us out? So there's not one solid answer to that, but anything is possible.
All right, and one final question that I have to ask here, since I'm at a university, somebody asked, what is your background and what skills do you think are important for an investigator of cultural heritage crimes to have?
Well, so my background is in criminal justice, but I've been in law enforcement for almost 30 years. I started as a military police officer. I started my federal career basically with U.S. Customs Service in Miami. So I've kind of worked my way up to dealing with, to being a federal agent. So skills to have, you have to be organized. You have to know how to write well. You have to understand the crime and the law that's being applied to that prosecution. You have to love what you're doing. We're called special agents because the special, a lot of people don't know this, even people I work with, the special means, or comes from the word specialized or specialization. So the 1811 system that all these agencies that have special agents, you know, us, the FDA, whoever, we're specialized in a certain area. Within our agency, you have to self-motivate and specialize to stay in what you want to be in. And sometimes some people just haven't figured that out. This for me has been kind of a passion. I guess I have a lot of history background. I'm probably a frustrated archaeologist. You know, as a kid, that's probably one of the things I always wanted to do. So this actually plays in pretty well with it. Plus, I hang out with a lot of archaeologists now. So it's a lot of self-motivation. It's a lot of staying up on current trends. It's a lot of reading. I've been doing a lot of reading on my Thailand cases and buying my own books because we don't have those resources. So there's a lot of factors, but you have to love what you do. For like any job, you have to love what you do. You know, I have days where I'm really frustrated with a lot of things. Working for the government, kind of tough at times, but I managed to work through that when I sit down and I start going through one of my cases and doing something. You know, whether it's you know, reading or it's writing a report, going through subpoena production or whatever. So there's you have to have the passion for it. And my passion, I find with my what I've loved about history and studying and reading and all that all these years is that in this position I can take a proactive make a difference, you know.
Well, your passion is certainly evident, the way that you speak about these cases. Cameron, do you also want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, from my perspective, just because I've had a long, varied run as well, and can definitely feed into that question. My background is in international relations and in history, but come from a law enforcement family. My father was border services for 30 years, so I've kind of had both sides in my blood. I guess the biggest thing I could say is be curious and just find yourself in a position where you're able to put the dots together on the big map. Know where the trends are going to be able to sort of take a look at where the gaps and the risks and the points of exploitation are. And if you're able to do that and marry that with you know, an interest in history, archaeology, political science, international affairs, then I think you've got a bit of a magic combination there.
For sure, yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you both, as well as Chris, who unfortunately had to duck out since it's so late in Thailand. Chris, Cameron, thank you so much for adding to this and kind of fleshing out this discussion and adding context. And Dave, thank you very much. Wonderful presentation, excellent cases. And it's been a real pleasure. So thank you especially for kicking us off with this lecture series, and apologies for any technical difficulties. All of you have been stars. So thank you very much. I would like to thank the audience, and I hope that the audience will join me in thanking all of you, even if you can't hear us all clapping.